Hello and welcome to our channel Sci Made Easy. Today we'll be discussing about genetics and its impact on our ecosystem. I'd like to start with a very simple question. Why don't any two of us look exactly the same? Even identical twins have a few differences. So what is it that makes you, you? The answer is genetics. It's the science of how traits are passed on from parents to children. In this topic, I would like to introduce you to different terminologies relating to genetics like DNA, genes, chromosomes, and I hope that you'll be able to answer a couple of questions like how are traits inherited? How does variation arise? Or how does genetics apply in our lives? Before we dive into it, here are some important concepts that would be useful for you during the lecture. As you know, all cells have a nucleus. The nucleus contains a condensed mesh of genetic material called chromatin. When this chromatin is decondensed, we get the chromosomes. Chromosomes are combination of DNA and proteins, and these proteins are called histones. These are special types of proteins which are involved in DNA wrapping for it to form chromosomes. This is the structure of a DNA. As you can see here, DNA is a bihelical structure which is connected with hydrogen bonds. This DNA is the basic essence of genes. Genes, in turn, are comprised of two alleles. One of these alleles is the dominant allele, while the other one is the recessive. Before we go into more details, I would like to describe some terms which are necessary to keep in mind while studying genetics. Genotype is your genetic makeup, meaning the DNA content in your cells. Phenotype, on the other hand, are the physical characteristics that you actually see as a result of the genetic makeup. An allele, like I mentioned, is a version of a gene which can be either dominant or recessive. Dominant allele is the one which, when present, the trait expressed by this gene is always expressed. On the other hand, recessive allele is the one that can only be expressed when both copies of the allele are recessive. There are two types of individuals. The first ones are heterozygous, which carry one dominant and one recessive allele for a particular trait. The other ones are called homozygous. These are individuals that carry either two copies of the same allele for a trait, which could be either the dominant allele or the recessive allele. The first mention of genetics was in the year 1800s. A monk named Gregor Mendel grew pea plants and made a discovery that changed biology forever. He studied the principles of genetics by carefully crossing plants. He noticed patterns in how traits like flower color or seed shape were inherited, thus giving us the foundation of genetics and making pea plants an important member of this journey. There are two laws of Mendelian genetics. The first one is called the law of segregation. Each organism has two alleles for each gene. Only one of this is passed on from parents to offsprings. This is called the law of segregation, meaning that if a couple has more than one children, it is not necessary that in all children the same allele would be passed on from the mother and the same allele would be passed on from the father. The second law is called the law of independent assortment, meaning that the traits are inherited separately. For instance, your hair color and your eye color are not related to each other, meaning that they are independently assorted. For example, a person with brown hair can have blue eyes, and a person with brown hair can also have brown eyes, meaning that it is not necessary that whenever somebody has brown hair, that person necessarily needs to have either blue or brown eyes, making this law of independent assortment. There are some exceptions, but we'll get to them later. Moving on to a couple of examples. The first example here shows that two heterozygous pea plants having one dominant allele and one recessive allele for the feature of tallness represented by capital T, which is a tall tree, and a small t, which is a short tree. When these heterozygous pea plants were crossed with each other, it was observed that when you make a Punnett square, which is described here, which is a simple representation of the genetics of the mother and the father plant. And when they are crossed, as you can see here, there will be different combinations that you will see. It was observed that 25% chance was that the progeny had tall height, and 25% was the chances that the progeny was short. These were both homozygous. However, there was a 50% chance that the plants could be tall. These were heterozygous. In total, there was a 75% chance that the tall trees will be born when two heterozygous pea plants were crossed. However, there was only a 25% chance that these tree plants would be short. Taking another example, in humans of cystic fibrosis, which is an autosomal recessive disorder. Humans have 46 chromosomes, meaning 23 pairs of chromosomes, out of which the 23rd pair is called the sex chromosome that defines whether you are a female with two X chromosomes or a male with one X and one Y chromosome. These are defined as X and Y chromosomes due to their shape. Coming back to cystic fibrosis. If the mother and the father are both carriers of this disease, that is, they have one dominant allele and one recessive allele. When they are crossed, this is another simple representation of how you can do it, but you can also do it with the Punnett square. So when you have this combination, you can get 25% chance of having diseased children, while you will have 75% chance of having healthy children, out of which 50% could be carriers. Moving on to the third example. This is Huntington's disease, which is called an autosomal dominant disorder, meaning that if a person has only one allele which is dominant, that person would be positive. The only case when a person would not show the characteristics of Huntington's disease is when both the alleles would be recessive. To conclude, here are a couple of questions which I would like to discuss with you. What is Mendel's first and second law? That's correct. The first law is the law of segregation, and the second law is the law of independent assortment. Moving on to the next question. Which plant species did Mendel research on? That's correct. Pea plants. Here is a brain teaser. If father has blood group A and the child has blood group O, what do you think could be the blood type of the mother? If the father is A, it could be that the father is this combination or the father is this combination. However, the baby has to be this combination because O is the recessive one. In order to have this, the dad must have an O. But the mother could be this, or she could be this, or she could be this. Because with all of these combinations, the IO comes from the father, and as long as the mother has one copy of this IO, the baby could have the blood group O. Moving on to the last question. What is the difference between a gene and an allele? A gene is the one that describes the phenotype in an individual. Allele is the one that gives the two copies for each characteristic trait. Thank you very much. I hope I could answer most of your questions. Please like and subscribe to our channel and don't hesitate to post questions in the chat. Thank you.